So welcome everybody to the first meeting of the 7-Eleven Oversight Surplus Committee. My name is Scott Sheldon with Terra Realty Advisors, and I know we're going to get into the introductions here, but again, I really appreciate everybody that agreed to be part of this process. I hope that you find it instructional, educational, and that at the end, we would like to be able to give to the District Board of Trustees your recommendations in terms of the 4 properties that we're going to be talking about. So why don't we go around the, I'll say the electronic or figurative room and introduce ourselves, starting with the district staff.
You had froze, but I believe what you're asking for is introductions by district staff. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Louis Freeze. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Operations for the district.
Hi, my name is Robert McIntyre. I'm the Associate Superintendent of Business Services.
My name is Melissa Payne. I'm the Executive Director of Contracts Administration. It's a pleasure to meet all of you tonight.
My name is Summer Sigler. I'm an executive director in the district, but I'm also serving on the committee as the administrative representative.
And I believe that's all the staff that's on the call today.
Then how about the consultants? Again, Terra Realty Advisors is the point person for the district and consultant to the district to assist in this process for all of you that are on the 7-Eleven committee. And joining me is Barry Schimmel. I'll let him introduce himself also. But we will be the representative and a resource to the district.
I'm Barry Schimmel. I'm glad to be here to help facilitate the process, which I've done several times. I'm a former educator from the teacher level all the way through the superintendent level. And the last 10 years since I've retired, I've helped school districts obtain asset management by looking at their properties and producing income that does not reduce their net assets of the total worth of their community.
Okay, so I believe now we'll go ahead and introduce committee members.
I'll start things off. I'm Don Gosney. Should we just get on this? Doreen?
Yes, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Doreen. I am a parent, a business owner, and a resident of El Sobrante, and I'm excited to be here.
Do we have a last name that you can share with us?
Yes, Doreen Chan. Sorry about that. I apologize. I would normally take this from the office, but I'm at a birthday party, taking it from the car. Kid's birthday party.
Hi, I'll go next, everyone. My name is Samantha Torres. I am a resident of Richmond. I am a mom to an incoming 4th grader at Washington Elementary. And I am glad to be here. And I'm glad that this is moving forward.
Mr. Henry Sanders. Good evening, sir. Would you be able to introduce yourself to the committee?
Might be
Mr.
having technical problems, maybe. Jamela Smith, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamila Smith Folds. I'm a school board trustee for West Contra Costa Unified School District. I'm happy to be here to learn and to listen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Completes the list.
So Mr. Saunders, is he still on the call? I saw him on there a minute ago.
He's on by phone, so you're not able to see him as a panelist.
I'm sorry, I only heard 4 introductions of committee members.
I think Samantha Torres also, she's on the line.
Yes, so she introduced herself. So this evening we've met Ms. Doreen Chan, Ms. Samantha Torres, Ms. Summer Sigler, and Mr. Don Bosney. And it appears by the number that we have Mr. Henry Sanders on the line, but we have not been able to hear from him yet tonight.
It gives us 5.
Okay, well, hopefully that's a figuring out the Zoom thing on the phone and that he can hear us because he is showing up. So should we move on and then when he's able to connect, he can introduce himself?
Sounds good to me.
So the first thing that we'd like to do is the approval of the agenda. Everybody should have received that on Monday. And again, from a legal perspective and for staff and the legal counsel, do we need to take a formal vote on this or what is the procedure on this?
A committee member should make a motion to approve the agenda as presented in a second.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
I second the motion.
Okay, can we have a show of hands? I think, well, maybe not because not everybody is on the call. We're going to feel our way through this a little bit, so bear with us if you can. Maybe just a roll call vote. So Summer Sigler,
Yes.
Doreen Chan,
Yes.
Don Gosney,
He's on mute. Don, you're on mute. If you'll change your,
I am also in the room present.
oh, great. Thanks, Don.
Sorry, if I unmute, then I've got reverberation back and forth.
okay.
Understand.
Jamela Smith.
So that's our,
She's a
she's
board
our
member.
trustee.
Okay, so, okay, I'm making notes and multitasking here, which is always a scary thing. So did we get a full vote on that? Other than Mr. Saunders?
Ms. Torres,
Yes.
Okay.
you.
So for the record, I count 5 of the 8 members present. The ones that would be missing are Miss Diana Perez Cruz and Javita Wagley and Trey Holland. Is that accurate?
I believe so.
Okay.
Your vote tally should record that Henry Saunders did not vote.
Correct.
And
Okay.
you guys hear me now?
Oh, there we are. Yes.
You can hear me now?
I
Yes,
can.
Mr. Sanders.
Oh, great.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm driving to where you are now because I got absolutely flummoxed with the machine. I am James Sanders. I'm a retired teacher, and in my background, I also have experience as an auditor appraiser and appraiser for the assessors of Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And I retired as a peace officer before that. So, so I have some expertise to contribute with respect to different things.
Mr. Sanders, we took a vote on the action item of approving the agenda, and we would like to hear your vote of approving the agenda so we can move forward, please.
Oh, good. I vote in the affirmative.
So we have a unanimous 5 of 5.
Okay. The next item is in terms of the opening procedures is future committee dates. Those obviously we're holding one today, and then the next 3 dates will be August 25th, September 15th, and October 13th. So I'm not sure that is requires any kind of action. It's more notification. And so if everybody could put that on their calendars, we would hold the same Zoom plus live at the district office over off of Marina, and those would be held starting at 6 o'clock p.m. So if we can move on to the public comment section, I'll read this. Members of the public are invited to speak in any manner related to the 7-Eleven committee at this time. Members of the public may speak on individual items of interest in the agenda as those items are discussed. Is there anybody, member of the public, that is on this call that wishes to speak?
So we don't have any hands raised at this time.
Okay. So then moving on to the discussion items, number D1 is a presentation of the 7-Eleven committee process and Brown Act, and that will be presented by Nancy Taylor with Orbach, Huff, and Henderson. Hello, Nancy.
Good evening. Hi, thank you. I'm Nancy Taylor, a partner at Orbach, Huff, Henderson, and I'm district's legal counsel. And among the various things that I advise the district on, one of the things that I regularly advise on is real property. Tonight, my goal is to explain to you guys the legal requirements for the purposes of this advisory committee that you guys have also generously agreed to donate your time and efforts to, which we appreciate, and to go over the legal requirements of the California Brown Act that apply to this particular committee. So first, we're going to go over what is this committee and why is it required. So the legal requirements for this committee are found in the Education Code. And the Education Code requires that before a school district can dispose of its surplus property, the board has to appoint a 7-Eleven committee. And the committee's purpose is to advise the board in developing policies and procedures in the use or disposition of school buildings or property that's not needed for school purposes. And if the property is not needed for school purpose, we usually call that surplus. So when you hear me talk about surplus property, that's what I'm talking about. And the committee can be formed for multiple or single property evaluations. But if it is convened for a singular property, nonetheless, the district and the committee has to evaluate district-wide issues. For this particular committee, you guys are going to be asked to evaluate 4 sites. When we talk about these committees, our lingo for it is typically a 7-Eleven committee. And so the reason why we call it a 7-Eleven committee is because the education code requires that this committee be composed of between 7 and 11 committee members. And those committee members must be representative of 7 categories that are set forth in the Ed code. We could go to the next page that will show you each of the categories of members that must be composed in this group. So all of you that introduced yourself tonight as committee members are representative of one of these 7 groups. So at some point, if you guys get together in person, you could have a fun little mixer to decide who has what category. And those categories are ethnic, age groups, and socioeconomic composition of the district, a business community member, teachers, landowners and renters within the district's boundaries, administrators, parents of students that go to the district, and persons with specialized experience or expertise that could assist the committee members in the goal that you guys are going to be working towards. And that goal or purpose is to advise the board in developing policies and procedures in the use or disposition of surplus property. And again, when we talk about surplus property, it is property that the district does not need for its purposes. And the district's consultants that you're going to be hearing from later tonight, Scott and Barry, and who will be working with you throughout this process, will help you develop those policies, procedures, and a report that will ultimately be provided to the board. And the committee has statutorily enumerated duties and obligations. That means that the Ed Code sets forth the scopes and duties of this committee. And those are that you are to review the projected enrollment and other data that's provided to determine the amount of surplus space and rental property, real property, to establish a list of the uses of the surplus property that will be acceptable to the community, and to have a priority list circulated throughout the attendance area, and to provide for hearings of community input on acceptable uses, including sale or lease for child care development purposes, and to make a final determination of the limits of tolerance of use, and ultimately to provide a written report to the board recommending determination of whether the property is indeed surplus, and if it is, what your recommended uses of that surplus property is. And again, the district's consultants will assist the committee members throughout these meetings and throughout this process to come up with that report. And the report should include a determination regarding the highest and best use of the property. If it's applicable and if it's beneficial, it can include information on appraisals of the property to assist in determining the most profitable use and fair market value. And also could include information on the title report to determine if there are any restrictions or covenants on the property, because that will affect the fair market value and use and development of the property. And then once you get your report together, the board considers the recommendations made by this advisory committee, and they'll adopt a resolution regarding the intended disposition of the property, if any. The board does not have to make the findings that are set forth in the report, or they could just decide that maybe they don't believe that it's surplus property after all, and they're going to hang on to it longer. But really, your report should provide them the basis for making those sorts of determination. So that's going to move us on to the Brown Act. So this committee is subject to the California Brown Act, and that act is California's sunshine law. And what that means is that it requires local governments including the school district, to conduct their business in an open and public forum, except in very limited circumstances. And it's based on the state's policy that the people must be informed of the government's business. And it keeps the public informed on the comings and goings of the district. And it will also keep them informed of this advisory committee that's been appointed by the board. The Brown Act also provides a procedural framework for these meetings. And we'll go over a little bit of that. I won't get into too much detail because staff will assist this committee in making sure that the procedural requirements of the Brown Act are complied with as you have your meetings. So the Brown Act applies to, and this is the definition that's set forth in the government code, but basically it applies to the school board, obviously, and any committee, subcommittee, advisory group that it appoints. And it applies to each member of this committee. So each of you have a duty and an obligation also to comply with the Brown Act. The definition of the local government or legislative body is very broad, and the reason for that is to capture all workings of the school district or local agency. It covers a large, it covers just about every government agency. I'm just going to say school district because that's what's most applicable here. But it does include cities, counties, those sorts of agencies as well. But it is very broad, so that it covers everything that the school district is doing, all of their business, and it avoids the ability of a school district to delegate its authority to a committee that then doesn't have open and public meetings. So that's why the definition is very broad. And it includes commissions, committees, boards, other bodies, and advisory committees. And those can be temporary or permanent decision-making or advisory, and they can be established by resolution or formal action of the board. So in a nutshell, there's a long way to say that the Brown Act applies to this advisory group, and it applies to each member of this group. So the central provision of the Brown Act, it requires that the meetings be open and public, and the definition of meeting is very broad, so that it encompasses almost every gathering of a majority of the members. It's a congregation of a majority of the members of a legislative body at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee. And it's not just in-person meetings. The use of any direct communication or personal intermediary or technological devices that are employed by a majority of the members to develop a collective consensus, including, and you'll see these are your social media, email, telephone, text messages, or even talking through an intermediary, which could be staff that's assisting you. Those all are instances where we have to consider whether what is going on is an actual meeting of a majority of the group to develop a collective consensus of the subject matter of this committee. Because if that is occurring, then the Brown Act applies. So when I say it applies to you, what do I mean by that? It means that communication amongst the members of this committee needs to be limited to either public and open meetings, or you need to avoid coming to a collective consensus about a subject matter of this committee outside the parameters of one of the noticed meetings. The meetings are, and when we talk about collective consensus, we're talking about substance, not procedure. So communication limited to providing information, such as just a weekly report, or procedural or administrative matters, scheduling, agenda, time allotted for each of the items. Those don't constitute meetings if you're not substantively talking about the discussions of the subject matter of this committee. So you don't have to worry if you are accidentally having a meeting outside of a noticed public meeting, if you're simply talking about procedure, okay? And then really the test of if you are engaging in that discussion, whether or not the purpose of the discussion is to develop a collective concurrence. And the test there is if the discussion can potentially contribute to developing a collective concurrence is likely to constitute a meeting for Brown Act purposes. Even if the board or community member does not participate in the discussion, the mere act of listening can contribute to developing a concurrence. So there are a lot of instances that have been developed over the years by case law about what is a meeting, because that's really sort of the crux of whether or not there's been a Brown Act violation, right? Is whether or not this communication that's going on outside of a duly publicly noticed hearing is whether or not that is a meeting. So here are some instances that could potentially be considered a meeting. So we need to be mindful of them in our communication with each other. One is group text. If ideas are exchanged among committee members to come to a collective consensus or understanding of a subject matter of this committee, that is a meeting. So you want to be careful about your group text with each other. Another is what they consider a hub of the wheel, which is consecutive conversations to pull the committee members. So I may go to committee member number one and ask what their opinion or their consensus or what their vote is going to be or what their recommendation is going to be, right? And then I then go to committee member number two and I do the same thing. Well, over time, I've now had a discussion with a majority of the committee members and I've gotten their collective consensus on something. That's a meeting, that's in violation. There's also what case law has called a daisy chain, right? So it's consecutive conversations, one person to the next. So that's A to B, A to C, A to D. Collectively, I've now violated the Brown Act because I have a collective consensus of all of the board meetings as to something within the subject matter. Another interesting one that we see a lot, and I have to caution board members sometimes on and other committee member meetings, is they will go to a local blog and they will make a comment on what their position is on a matter that's within the subject matter of the school district. And then other board members, committee members will go on and they too will put their opinion or their vote or their position on the matter of interest. And then pretty soon you have a majority of board members that have all commented on this public blog. And again, that's a violation of the Brown Act. So really, if you're going to be discussing matters of substance of this committee, in order to avoid even the perception that you are violating the Brown Act, you really want to limit conversation outside of these public meetings with each other. Sometimes we've seen that it does unintentionally happen. If you find that all of a sudden the committee members have engaged in group text or email. Email is another one where people will start responding to one email and all of a sudden you've got a collective consensus and it's a majority and then you violated the Brown Act. If any of that happens, then committee members, you want to go and talk to the district staff so that that can be corrected as soon as possible, okay? And then the Brown Act does have 6 specific categories of exceptions that the legislature has said just don't violate the Brown Act. And these have come up because, of course, you know, a lot of you community members may be neighbors, you may be friends, you may be PTA members, you're running into each other in the community, and we don't want you to run away screaming in the opposite direction because you're afraid that all of a sudden you're going to improperly hold a meeting. That's not going to happen. So those common scenarios the legislature has said, here are 6 sentences that are pretty common, and these do not constitute a meeting, so we don't have to worry about them. The first one is this no quorum. So it's conversations, whether in person or by telephone members between members of the committee, do not constitute a meeting because it's not a majority. And if you're not talking about committee subject matter, then also not a meeting. There's a second one, which is attendance at conferences or similar gatherings. This is if you go to a seminar, educational gathering, you could do that and not have to worry about the Brown Act. However, in order to qualify for this exception, the conference has to be open to the public and limited to issues of general interest, and it can't be specifically tied to the subject matter of this committee. There's also community meeting exception, which allows you guys to continue going to neighborhood meetings, Chamber of Commerce meetings, lunches, community meetings, etc., without worry that you're violating the Brown Act. Again, however, for this exception to apply, it does need to be an open and publicized community meeting. And again, you can't discuss amongst yourself the business of this particular committee. The other ones, I think probably the one that's maybe most applicable to you guys is the social or ceremonial exception. So you can continue to socialize with each other and go to ceremonial functions as long as, again, you don't discuss amongst yourself the business of this committee. And again, if you guys have questions, or if you do find yourself having accidentally met up with a majority of your committee members for some reason, and you're at all concerned that there may have been a violation, again, just please go to district staff and they can assist you through that.
Nancy, could I give an example that you might give us an opinion on that happens a lot? I'm out at the local grocery store and I ran into committee member 1. I go, boy, that was a great meeting the other night. I really liked the suggestion about blah, 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 blah. What do you think about it? And it ends. And 3 days later, you're in the Home Depot and you run into another committee member and say, I saw committee number 1 and we thought the meeting was great. And this was a terrific idea about such and such. And what do you think, board member number 2, or it's not board member, committee member number 2? How would you respond to that as far as a Brown Act violation?
Well, it could potentially be considered a serial meeting, right? So I'm collectively going around to get a consensus and understanding of what people's position is. And again, remember what I said, that if even the mere act of listening can still at times be a violation. So I would just suggest that, you know, that be avoided, because you don't, I tell my clients all the time, you don't want to be in the position of having to defend yourself from the appearances of impropriety, right? So I'd rather that you not have to defend that either you didn't talk about the substantive subject matter of this committee, or that there wasn't a collective consensus because committee member B didn't reply to me, or even that I didn't maybe get a majority of the committee members to speak with me or reply. I just would rather that clients not be in that position. So I would say, just don't do it. If you want to talk about committee subject matter matters, let's do it when you're in this meeting and it's open to the public, so that we just don't even need to worry about it.
Your advice is point on, particularly you don't have to defend yourself if you didn't get into that conversation.
Yeah,
then it becomes a moot point. Thank you, Nancy.
Yep. And I would say probably in my experience, I've been representing public agencies, mostly public school districts, for 17 years. And I would say for this particular type of committee where I see the biggest problem is emails. So I just want to just again reiterate that to the extent that we can avoid emailing each other, let's do that. If you're talking about procedure, that's fine. You'll probably get emails from Terra Realty or Melissa about the procedures of this committee. But let's try to avoid emailing each other about the subject matter if at all possible. Okay, so the Brown Act, in addition to just dealing with how the meetings need to be open in public, they also have some procedural requirements. And I'll go over a few of those, but like I said, district staff will be here to help you guys if you have questions about the procedural requirements of these open meetings. There has to be regular meetings typically, but that's not applicable to advisory committees. And you saw at the beginning of this agenda, you will have, I believe, 3 or 4 meetings coming, but you're not required to have regular meetings. And then we're allowed to have this meeting tonight via video conference, thanks to recent legislation which was passed after the COVID pandemic, because the legislature understands that until we're out of this pandemic, that people may need to attend to these meetings via teleconferencing. And what we've seen is that a lot of our participation in public meetings have increased because of this flexibility. And particularly West Contra Costa does actually have a resolution that allows for these meetings to take place telephonically. So you probably, all of the meetings will be, that option will be available to you. And then any person, so member of the public can attend, and they are allowed to videotape these meetings as long as they're not disruptive. For agenda requirements, again, district staff's going to help you guys with this, but just generally they have to be posted 72 hours before the meeting. If there's a special meeting, it's 24 hours, but I doubt you guys have one of those. And the agenda needs to provide sufficient detail to allow the public to determine whether to participate. That just has to be a brief general description of the matters you're going to discuss. And there are exceptions to standard agenda language requirements that I put here. It's probably not applicable to you guys, but emergency, if there's a need to take an immediate action, responding to questions, asking clarification, making a brief announcement or a brief report of an activity. Okay. And then most importantly, I always end with the violations just to sort of like hammer home why we care about the Brown Act beyond just the really public, the importance of public participation. But the Brown Act actually has a few teeth in it, and there's a violation of the Brown Act. It's a misdemeanor, and there can be some liability if there's actual intent to deprive the public of an opportunity to participate. The public can also sue to stop Brown Act violations, but the agencies are allowed to cure a Brown Act violation. And that's why I said if there's any concern amongst this group that there may have been a violation, an inadvertent violation through email, text messages, phone calls, meetings, whatever it is, you bring that to staff so that it can be cured. And then at times, well, if there's a Brown Act violation, then the action taken is nullified. So it is important to understand that you're subject to the Brown Act. Generally, what the Brown Act requires is that the discussions of the subject matter of this committee be in public, give the public an opportunity to comment, because you don't want to be in a position of any of these bad things. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Nancy. That was that good information. Are there any questions from any of our committee members that would like to further clarification or just whatever on this item?
Mr. Gosney has his hand raised. I both physically have it raised and it's on the,
I see.
I would just hope to make sure that everybody here understands also that they are they're subject to the Public Records Request Act. And that means that they cannot delete their emails or texts, because that's a violation of the law. I hope that we can get Nancy to perhaps weigh in on this. I serve on a lot of different committees, and this is one of those things where they say, well, nobody ever told me that I had to follow the law. These are actually attorneys that are serving on there. Nobody ever told me I had to follow the law when it comes to the Brown Act or the Public Records Request Act. We've got several of them on another committee I'm on that they've been asking for the stuff now for 15 months. And people say, I don't have to give you that. Or I've deleted all my stuff. Perhaps you can weigh in on that.
For sure. So California also has the California Public Records Act, and it's the act that allows members of the public to request public records of a public entity. So in this case, this committee is in a committee that's appointed by the governing board of the school district. So the records, emails, text messages, all of those things that relate to the business of this community are public, or this committee, I keep calling you a community, my apologies, are subject to the Public Records Act. So while I wasn't asked to prepare a presentation for you guys on that, I do want to, thank you, Dawn. I think that's a really good idea, because when I said, we need to be mindful of email and text messages, I often get committee members who are upset because they don't realize that if they are discussing the committee's public business through their personal cell phones or through their personal emails, that those are disclosable. So again, I don't know, maybe Melissa or Scott, you guys know if the district's going to issue emails for the committee members, or if you will be using your personal emails. However that's set up, just know that in conducting that correspondence, that it's just, if someone asks for it, you have to turn it over.
The follow-up question is, should we establish a separate account for the committee?
We've agreed, Nancy, that all the email will come through Melissa to the committee. So she'll be our control point.
Yeah, so I would say use that procedure to avoid having to dig through your personal accounts to turn over public records.
Does that mean that we are required to go through Melissa if we want to talk to each other? It has to be filtered through staff?
No, I think we have two conversations happening right now. So I merely want to serve as at the service of the committee. So if there are questions for staff, please feel free to send those to me. I sent out the agenda, and I'll be sure to do that. But in no way am I here to limit anyone's ability or access. We had a comment here, kind of a follow-up question here in person at the FOC, which was, is it worth creating a separate email account? And I know that on some other committees, some members have done that. So they've created an email that they use specifically for committee so that they can keep that separate from their personal. So that, of course, is an option and a strategy that some committee members use. But that's not something that's required. So hopefully I answered both questions. And if I didn't, please let me know.
No, I was concerned because Barry Schimmel said that it all has to go through you.
I believe what he was referring to was just that I'm here to be a support for the committee. So if you have questions, of course, you can reach out to staff. But I'm here as an administrative aide for all of you. So I just see myself as a resource, but in no way a hindrance or a required stopping place.
Well, you know, I trust you.
just helpful, that's all.
Thank you.
I do believe we had a couple of other hands raised. Ms. Torres?
Hi, so my question had to do with actually gathering to visit the sites in question. Given, I mean, I'm not sure if that's scheduled in a future committee meeting, or if the expectation is that we, if we're interested in visiting the sites, that we do so on our own and make accommodations with district staff. But it seems like it might be beneficial to have more members meeting together to visit sites rather than have individuals. So how, you know, hypothetically, or maybe not so hypothetical, because I am interested in visiting the sites, how would we make that work and to comply with Brown Act?
Scott will share some information about that. Well, that's kind of on our agenda because we had the same thought that you did and want to meet your needs. So we think some kind of field trip at one of these meetings might be appropriate. And Scott's going to share a concept with the committee and see what their feelings are.
And Barry, if I could just jump in there, I think what Ms. Torres is asking is that she's interested in a forum like that. And so since that would be a collective gathering of the committee where they would be speaking of the subject matter, then that would be a Brown Act meeting, and we would need to make sure that we were providing public access for that meeting. And so I think those are some of the logistical details that we would have to work through. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I believe I heard.
That's exactly accurate, Melissa.
That's correct. Yes.
And
Yes.
we've done this before, and there is a way to post and have the public, and the public's actually invited to come on the field trip if they want.
Yeah, I guess it, you know, just to further clarify that it would be just like this meeting. It would be publicly noticed, and whatever and however the logistics work, we'd need to figure that out. But it would be a publicly noticed meeting. So then all the provisions, we would be meeting all the provisions of the Brown Act. Hope that makes sense. And that was one of the things that we were going to be talking about, to find out from the committee members if that was something that would be worthwhile from their perspective. We believe that it is, but we would like to get your feedback.
We have another question here in-house.
Just a follow-up question. If we were to schedule a visit, just with the amount of notice that's required, it would have to be posted publicly 72 hours before we actually made the visit. And then we could make the visit as a committee, so we could all experience the same thing at the same time. And then later on, we could have our discussions in a regular meeting. Would that meet the requirements?
Nancy,
I believe they would.
Nancy, I'll let you respond on that. I believe it would.
Yeah, I mean, I would, in abstraction without knowing the details, yeah, it should. I mean, there's ways to do this. We do it all the time. It just needs to be publicly noticed. You need to give the public an opportunity to attend. And then, you know, sometimes also there are site visits, and then there's a break, and then you reconvene for the meeting after that. So Scott and Barry, you guys will just have to come up with whatever the committee believes is the best logistically, and then we can just quickly review it to make sure that you are meeting the requirements of the Brown Act. But it is doable. You just need to give notice and opportunity to the public to attend.
Thank you. Does that answer the question, Samantha? And also, I believe James.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I think I'm guessing I didn't see any comments or any mention of site visits, so that's why I brought it up.
Terrific. Any other questions or thoughts on this particular subject matter?
So I don't see any hands at this point for this item.
Okay, So let's move on to D2, and that's the preliminary review of the properties under consideration. So in preface to that, there was some information that was sent to everybody, and what I want to do, and again, I didn't really have a chance to introduce our firm. Terra Realty Advisors, we're a public advisor to a lot of different public agencies, school districts, cities, counties, in real estate. So a huge part of our practice is helping to, whether it's a 7-Eleven committee, whether it's a city council, whether it's a school board, understand what their real estate assets are, and from a market perspective, what they might be, and then what does that mean in terms of future potential revenues or other things like that. So we do a lot of that throughout the state of California in terms of helping districts and councils understand that. We also do a lot of asset management work, again, helping our public agency clients understand, I've got something, I want to do something with that. What does that mean? And, not only from what does it mean from a revenue perspective, but what does it mean from an asset perspective? So we've had a lot of experience with that. We've developed a lot of properties, so we understand a lot of the different nuances and procedures and processes that need to happen. Many times with school district properties, especially, there are specialized zoning in West Contra Costa, and the sites that we're going to be talking about are not an exception to that. They typically have either a public quasi-public or a public institutional or some other designation that is really specific to public use, and in this case, a school. It doesn't a lot of times allow other types of uses unless you go through an entitlement process with the agency, and that could be, in this case, either the city or the county, in order to change the land use to allow it to be used for something else. So again, we're going to be talking a lot about that in terms of as we go through the different properties and as we share with you some of the ideas and thoughts that we have on that, as much to help you understand from a market perspective what that is, but also to elicit your opinions and your thoughts from community members. So, and what is needed in the community and what would be beneficial in the community. Again, weighing that off against the needs and the charge that this committee has for looking at these properties, which is they're not needed by the district, but the district does have needs, and a lot of those needs revolve around the ability to create additional sources of revenue so they can continue to enhance and serve the educational needs of the students in their district. So there's a lot of different things that we'll be talking about, but I wanted to give you some brief background on that and let you know from the perspective that we're going to be taking, and then what we would like the feedback from you all to give to us. So the properties, there's only 4 properties that we're going to be looking at, and that's really good. The 3 of those properties are vacant. In other words, there's nothing built on them. 1 of them does have buildings on it. All of the properties have not been used for many years, and they either had buildings on it and that have been demolished, or, and again, the one case, there's buildings that are currently on it, and in another case, I believe that nothing has ever been built on it. So, or only a portion of it maybe. So again, we're going to look at it through the lens of how the private world would look at it, and help you all understand that perspective from a land use perspective, from a valuation perspective. So if we could roll up the next slide, please. So the map and all of these sites are identified. We'll be drilling down a lot more on this. Again, this is a big picture overview. So we're at 10,000 feet. And but what we wanted to show in this slide was the geography from the district perspective and from city perspective of where the 4 sites are located. The next slide. And this slide shows the attendance boundary where these sites are located. And as was mentioned earlier, looking at, Nancy mentioned this, looking at the other school sites that are within there, looking at the enrollment figures, we're going to be providing that information to you. But again, it's helpful to have a perspective and a context to look at these sites in terms of what is the neighborhood there? What are the neighborhood needs today as well as in the future? There's always a crystal ball here. And then what are some of the physical constraints, economic constraints that might impact your thought process? And that's one of the things that we'll be talking about also. Next slide. So we'll start with the first site, which is a very interesting and unique site. This is the Adams site. It's actually located in Contra Costa County. So it is in the unincorporated part. It is not within the jurisdiction or boundaries of Richmond or any of the other cities. And it's there's, again, I'm just going to talk very big picture. We're going to drill down on this. We did an initial report for the district almost 12 years ago, actually over 12 years ago, on the sites, all of the sites except the Harman Knowles. So we've got 12 years and 13 years of looking at these sites and thinking about them. So again, they're pretty much in the same condition today as they were, 12, 13 years ago. But the particular issues on this site, again, the zoning is government use. It's actually, I think it's a PA in the county. But there's some topographical challenges. I don't have the cursor and that doesn't matter, but we'll show you that it's on the side of a hill basically. So you've got areas, thank you. So that area is flat and then it benches down, and then the area where the cursor is benched down also. And then there's, the buildings kind of step down. So the main building is 3 floors right there, and then it steps down to the rest of that area there. And you can see it's kind of surrounded by a lot of housing that was built back in the 30s and 40s. And then up to the left-hand side, that area is one that's there, and there's a fairly significant slope that comes off of Arlington there. And then again, it benches down to the south there, or down, it's not south, down. So there's another area down there. So there's a lot of topography with this particular site. The site in the middle, sort of the hole right there at the top, that is owned by a church area. They do have a school and a preschool and things like that they're operating. So, but the rest of the site that's outlined in yellow are the district boundaries. And you can see and when we get drill down a little bit more, some of those streets that kind of stub in to the site right there were actually at one point continued all the way through. So Patterson Circle, yeah, that connected up. And so we have the original maps, and you're going to be looking at that. And again, it's interesting to see how this was originally laid out. When the district acquired it, they merged a lot of those, or they merged all of them. And there's still actually 5 parcels, I believe. 5 individual, distinct, separate assessor parcels. So interesting piece of property. The other thing that is a constraint on this is that the Hayward Fault runs through a portion of this property. And what that means, it has a pretty big impact in terms of today, what you can build. So in the distant past, when these things were all built, the housing around there, I think they had identified that, but they didn't have the same constraints or the same building code requirements that would be in place today. So one of the things when I look at something like this and a site like this is that, well, that's an obvious that, housing would be something that, if somebody was to reuse this site and it was truly surplus and all of that, that would be something that would be, the kind of the first thing, low-hanging fruit, if you will. The issue with that today is that there are fairly significant setback requirements between houses in fault areas and in Alquest Priola, which is a mapping that's done that identifies faults and those kinds of things. And again, we've got all the maps. We're going to be sharing those with you. So again, as you're looking at this site and you're thinking about this site, it's a really wonderful site, a wonderful piece of property, but it's got a lot of constraints with it. And we're going to talk about that and talk about what that might mean. So that's the Adams site. And again, it's a little under 9 acres of property and approximately 5 parcels of land.
Before we Move on, we have a question.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Don Gosney here. I just touching on this because at my age, in 5 minutes, I'll forget that I was even here. The area around the church, that road, that kind of horseshoe shaped road, in recent years, there's been a lot of discussion between the church and the charter school that was going to be building on the Adams site. Who owns that road? Is that public access? Is it owned by the church? Is it owned by the school district? Or is it co-owned? Because that's going to make a significant difference. Because if the church people really didn't like the idea that there might be 900 cars a day dropping off their kids in the morning and picking them up in the afternoon on that road. So do you know the answer to that?
My understanding is that that's a public road. That's what's showing up on the maps. That's something that we'll definitely confirm, but the mapping and stuff that we did 13 years ago and the information that we have now is that is a public road. So it is actually maintained by the county.
Both sides of that argument were absolutely swore that they had physical proof from the county showing that they were right, that the church owned it, that the school district owned it, whatever. And so you didn't know what to believe.
Well, we have title reports on it. And believe me, this is not the first time that a question like that has come up in terms of somebody's prior rights or, whatever. But, the title report shows that it is not owned by either party, that it is a public road. So, and again, we did verify that 13 years ago with the county. So, and we'll do that again as part of our due diligence process. And as we look at all of that, the other question that would come back on, and this would be my initial retort is, have you been out repairing that road then if you own it? So because there's a pothole in there. So, and the chances of them having done any work in that is as close to zero as I can possibly imagine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? And I'll stop between each one of these, just if you have any questions. Again, I want to get everybody familiar with the property, familiar with what we're going to be talking about. So when you get the balance of the information, again, it's going to include title reports. We've already run title reports on all the properties and background on all of that. And we've drilled down considerably on these. And again, starting 12, 13 years ago. So the next site is the Harman Knowl site, and that is actually in the city of Richmond. The interesting part about this, and the reason why you see two different parcels there is the actual, the district owned property is 8.87 acres, which shows, both of those. But my understanding is that 3.78 acres is actually part of the park that is owned by the city or that is operated by the city of Richmond. And then the parcel to the left of that, which is approximately 2 acres, is actually owned in fee by the city of Richmond. So there's nothing in the title report that says that there's any kind of a recorded agreement with the city of Richmond. But again, very common, with schools and cities on parks to have shared areas where the land may be owned either by the city and the school district can use it during school hours, or the reverse in this case where the school district owns it and the city is, and I'm going to use the term loosely, operating, because you can see there it's the maintenance it could be better maintained. Let me put it that way. So again, that's an interesting thing that we're going to need to talk about in terms of, the area needs for parks, and the district needs. What does that mean? Because again, you've got about 5 acres of property that's basically the brown area there that, would be unencumbered, from any other agreements. And again, that's from the title reports and all the information that we've been able to get. And again, this is a public street. I'm glad that you brought that up. The frontage street is a public street. And so again, it's surrounded by residential. It is, from a first look, when you walk it, it's really a nice piece of property. And again, when you look at that, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind from a land use perspective, if it's not going to be an educational use, is some kind of residential. So again, we're going to need to talk about, what that means, what the park area means, And again, we'll have more information for that, but that's something, again, for everybody to think about, cogitate on. And, as you're looking at these things and as you're looking at and thinking about these, write your thoughts down, because that's the best way to sort of, when you come back and we get together again, that you'll have these thoughts and what about, or did you think of, or did you know? So that's very important from our perspective. We want your feedback. We want your lens looking at these properties and getting your perspective as a local community member.
I think it might be worth pointing out a good comparison between the Adams site and the Harman Knoll site. When you look at these flat maps, they're about the same acreage, but the limitations on the Adams site because of the slope does present some obstacles, where the Harman Knoll site is relatively flat. And later on, we'll get into a discussion about how that provides more opportunities.
Right, it's more usable. And again, the area, it does slope, but it's a gentle enough slope that it's not like where you're benching. And when I use the term benching, it's where you have a flat area and then you drop off to a 3-to-1 slope or something like that, that you can landscape but you can't really use, and then it's flat again. So that's benching, just for everybody. And if I use acronyms, because in my world, it seems like everything is an acronym, probably everybody's world it is. But if you don't understand something, please let me know, and I'll try not to speak in acronyms. So is there any questions on this? Again, we're at 10,000 feet, but any thoughts or any questions, please raise your hand.
Just one, if I may. On Birmingham Drive, which is on one side of the park, if there are significant apartment houses. So, but on the other side, on the Earl Way, it looks like single family homes. So when you look at the site, are you thinking about housing, or are you thinking about a public use?
We're going to be talking about all of that in terms of what we're going to present to you. If it's this kind of use, it has this meaning, and this meaning would include what do I have to do with zoning? What does that mean from a valuation point of view? And the one thing that you'll find from us, everything in my world, and I've been doing this for a while, is all about respecting the land. And part of respecting the land is respecting your edge conditions. And your edge conditions are everybody that surround you and are adjacent and or close to you, people that would be directly impacted by anything that would be done on a particular piece of property. And whether it's publicly owned or privately, it doesn't matter. Respect the land. And so when we're looking at things like that, we're saying, okay, there could be a public use here. It could be a school. There could be something else that would be publicly utilized, or from the private side, there could be housing, and housing takes a lot of forms there. And basically the forms are formed by density. So you mentioned that there's apartments. That's a higher density or higher use of the land. There are single families, which obviously is a lower use of the land. And there's impacts to that from traffic. There's impacts to that from value. There's impacts to that from the surrounding community, your greater community. So we're going to be talking about all of that. And, so again, we're not trying to, we have an open book, and we want everybody on the committee to have an open book in terms of looking at these things and saying what's important from the community with a lens of what's important for the district. So we want to make sure that we can balance that, that equation, if you will. That answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so next.
Ms. Torres?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Samantha's got another call.
Hi, I'm sorry. You had mentioned something about shared use with the parks, with the city parks. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yes, again, one of the things that we've asked staff to look at, because there's nothing in the public record, is there a written document that between the district and the city that governs, what happens with that piece of property. In other words, was there a document that the parties agreed to that says, hey, you own it, but we get certain rights on it. We got, we're going to build the park, we'll improve it. You guys you still own it, but you can use it for school purposes during the school day, and then it can be used for other purposes, and off school hours. That's something that would be very typical in a situation like this. Again, I don't know if there is or there isn't, or if it's just it's a verbal thing. I got to believe that there's probably something written somewhere that has something to do with the who does what to who.
Sure, I would appreciate if we could have access to exactly, I understand that there's no sort of formal written agreement, but if there is, for example, if the parks are requesting permit fees, if the parks are utilizing it for citywide events as a formal park site, it also, questions of insurance. The reason I asked is because I know that there is competition for park field use for permits and access to dedicated green spaces for sports or, group activities. And so I'd like some clarification exactly on how the city has been utilizing it, so we can see what, value we can get from it.
And all those things we are going to get for sure. And really the first part of that is understanding if there is any written documentation that sets out the rights and obligations and duties of both the parties. And that would come from a capital perspective as well as from an operating perspective. So absolutely, we can't, you as a committee member would not be able to make a decision about this property without understanding what was the impact of that, and what is the, what does that all mean? Or you focus on the 5 acres only that is not being, and I use the term encumbered, with another agreement. Terrific. It looks like Don's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the problems that we're going to run into with any kind of formal documentation is how current is it? I mean, there used to be a community center there, and it's been torn down more than 15 years ago. And so maybe that's the foundations that we're seeing in this aerial photograph. I don't know. But whatever agreement there may have been, is it applicable today? We don't know that.
We would hopefully, if there is a written agreement, there are dates on there. And again, agreements between public agencies are always an interesting, and fun thing for me. But again, we've seen documents from very, very old, again, with no sunsets on them. So again, it's going to be, we need to understand what the parties supposedly documented. And with that, then that gives us sort of a course of action. Okay, how the 7-Eleven committee do you want to approach this? Samantha, do you still have your hand up, or is that just from the last call or from the last comment? Yeah.
Scott, I also saw Melissa's hand up and she took it down, so maybe she got her question answered.
Okay. All right, so if we're good, we'll move on to Portala. And again, this is the first time I looked at this site, from the real estate perspective, it was holy Toledo. So this is on the side of a hill. What you're seeing, it's an old Google photo, although it's just, they haven't updated it. So it shows the outline of the old building that's now gone. We do have pictures of that, and but again, from a representational point of view, it's really helpful to take a look at this. So again, the property is about 5+ acres as I've got it drawn there, and it's not, I'm not drawing it on the property lines. We do have all the property maps and everything, but kind of from a usable perspective is what the position that we've got on here. So you can kind of see those lines that go north and south, up and down. And those again are, almost benchmarks. I think those are old drainage, concrete drains, because it is sloping down. That where the street is right there, that's high, it slopes down, Melissa, you're doing a great job on this. Thank you. So it's all sloped from there, and as it drops down, it drops down. It's like I said, it's a wonderful piece of property, and then there's some really significant issues with it. One issue, and it's hard to see up to the top end of the screen, on the other side of Portala Road, is a fairly significant PG&E station. So there's a lot of PG&E, there's a lot of high voltage lines that feed into that area right there. Again, we've got pictures of it. We'll share those. We're at the 20,000 foot level or 10,000 foot level. So you've got that. The other thing, there's a little stub street that goes up. I believe it's called Cvu, and it's right over if you go down right where it says zoning public, government public use, there's a little street that goes up there. So right there, yeah. And so that area, we do have information on that there are some fairly significant landslide issues in that area. Part of that's because of the topography. Part of it's because of the type of soil that it is. And so that would be a constraint or a cost, from a development perspective. The area that you see kind of on the left-hand side, that is all developed out. That's being retained by the district. And there's a charter school in there, I believe. So we've got this vacant piece of property, spectacular views from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Bay Bridge to, the Richmond Bridge. And it's a beautiful piece of property. It's very difficult to put, and I'm going to use the term commercial uses, including schools, because now with ADA requirements, being able to get around in multiple buildings and things like that would be very problematic. And things, most commercial properties have the same requirements. You can work around that. Residential does not as much. But again, this is going to be a really interesting piece of property to talk about. We're going to share again with you some of the constraints on that, some of the thoughts that we have in terms of what that means and how that can, how we're looking at it. And then again, we're going to want your thoughts on that. I know that the city of El Cerrito has approached the school district about taking that over and doing a park on it. I'm not sure that is really conducive to that because of the topography, but again, there are different ideas, different thoughts, and we're going to be exploring all of those. And again, this is a beautiful piece of property, but it's got a lot of hair on it. So,
I'd like to also point out, this is about 40% of the size of the other two sites you just looked at. It's one of the smaller sites. So when you just kind of look at the maps, this is about 40% smaller. It's a little over 5 acres.
Excuse me.
Yes, we have a comment.
I mean, at one time, not that long ago, El Cerrito wanted to use that site for their new library as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when they viewed candidates for a school board, that was the litmus test. If you tried to do what was best for the entire school district, they get out the tar and feathers. But as long as you were going to take care of them and give the property to El Cerrito for their library, then you were the favorite son.
I understand. That's part of the hair on this particular piece of property with, all right, there's political implications. There's physical limitations with the, with the slope, with the landslide, and then again, but at the same time, it's a beautiful piece of property. So I understand that. And I have heard the same thing, Don, and that goes back a long time. That goes back at least 12, 13 years. So
we have another comment here.
I'm sorry, Melissa.
When I was looking at this site and I thought about Fairmont School, which you haven't mentioned, Fairmont School is landlocked and the existing library in El Cerrito is adjacent to, contiguous with that site. So, so I investigated the idea of a land swap. And at this moment, the feeling I get from the planning department at El Cerrito is that they have a real possibility of a site at the BART station that might be part of a reconstruction versus this site, because they were told years ago that they would never get this site for a library. But, you know, it's still the Fairmont School, which is at the base of Stockton at San Pablo, is over enrolled. And so it has space needs. And as I understand it, we should be considering the needs of other sites, school sites, actually functioning schools. So relieving the over enrollment at Fairmont could be one of the issues to be investigated.
Yeah, that's one of those tangential issues that come up. It's not part of this site directly, but politically there may be a tie on that. And again, one of the things that we need to look at as a 7-Eleven committee is what is the enrollment, what is the capacity in that particular area? And then again, how does that impact this property? We want to make sure that we stay focused on that. And again, the goal of this committee is to help recognize some of these kinds of things and provide in a report, if you so choose, that you can address those kinds of things in terms of giving the board some ideas, thoughts, and potential directions that they may want to consider. Okay, is there any other thoughts or comments on the Portala site? All right. So we're at the last site, which is a Cvu site. This site is again within the county, just like Adams is. So we've got two properties the district owned that are in Contra Costa County unincorporated. We've got one in El Cerrito and one in Richmond. So there's three different public jurisdictions that control land use issues and those kinds of things. So this was a school site that was built originally in the 70s. It was demolished probably, I'm going to say 5-6 years ago, something like that. I could be off a couple of years, but and it was built in an area that was a subdivision. And I'm going to show you, I actually included a couple maps on this as a little bit of a drill down for the committee and show you how we're going to be looking at different things. But you can see that the main parcel, the 4.6 acre parcel, that was where the school site was. And then the other part, there's a drainage ditch there. That's what's kind of in the middle, and it separates it physically. And that parcel is actually the 3.3 acre parcel is owned by the district also. And there's a little footbridge that crosses that little channel right there. Some of the constraints on this particular site it is bounded by two railroad tracks, both on the top and the bottom. And so there's one, and there's the other one. And then again, it's not drilled down, or it's up. It's not a bigger picture, but to the top end is actually the bay, San Pablo Bay. So again, constraints, on this, which are very unique. There's you probably read about this or heard about it, but there is a rising sea that is impacting inundation over time. We've actually run those maps. We haven't updated them, but we will, to show you what the impact potentially over time is going to be in this whole area along the San Pablo Bay. Again, the railroads are fairly significant impacts to them, and in those are also gas and oil lines and things like that. My opinion would be, if the school district acquired this property today, that the California Department of Ed, or CDE, would probably not allow them to build on it. And for the reasons of, there's a lot of utilities, trains, and things like that are in the area, of that. So this, again, it's an interesting site. It's a good site in a lot of ways. The site on the parcel 2 area, you cannot access that by vehicle from the Cypress. So you can walk across it, but there's no there was no extension of that little road there to kind of to the bottom part. That's Ashford. So it kind of dead ends right there. They never did a crossing, although it probably thought about it at one point in time, and it actually shows on the old maps. So how you access the parcel 2 is actually a separate road. It's a private road. There's I can't remember the name of it, but there's a trailer park that comes right off of San Pablo Road, and then you access it off of there. So it's actually to the down part of the map, Melissa. So you would go, there's a road there, but then go Terra Hills Drive. That's what it is. but then go to the right a little bit and then down. No, to the right. There we go. And then down. If we get rid of the, whatever that little bar is right there. Anyway, all right, doesn't matter. We'll have more stuff on this, you know, when we send it all out and we talk in 30 days. So again, it's a very narrow one lane. It's a trestle crossing right there that you can get. Oh, thank you. There you go. And again, it's not shown on here, but it is a one lane road that that accesses that. You can see a ball field off to the left-hand side of the district parcel, and that property is actually owned by the garbage company. And that is an actively used, I think it was then, and I believe it still is, an actively used like for Little League and those kinds of uses. So, so again, we have been contacted by East Bay Regional Parks. We did talk to them. Their interest is in making sure that there's a way through their trail system that they can continue all of that. That we will make sure that they receive information and they can participate as a member of the public in this process also. But we will talk about that a little bit. And then if we could go down a little bit, I want to demonstrate just a little bit of what we're going to be talking about in some of the, as we drill down on these properties. So what you're seeing here, there's two maps. So the map on the left, the Cvu tentative map, that was actually the highlighted, kind of the orange highlighted, that is that 4-acre piece there that comes off of the main street. So that's good. That's good. So you can see it was actually parceled out at one point in time back in the 70s when the school district came in. They consolidated all that and it is now one parcel. But there is a map, and we did have conversations with the county about this map and whether it would still be viable. And the reason why I asked that question is that there are CC&Rs, which are conditions, covenants, and restrictions. You can see I'm not using acronyms or I'm defining them. And the CC&Rs that control all of that development, everything to the north of that or the top of it, and it is north in this case, kind of, are all controlled by CC&Rs. And those CC&Rs specifically state that nothing in that development can be anything other than a single family home. So one of the questions that we're going to have and that we're going to need to ask both of the county as well as legal are, well, what does that mean for this particular piece of property? And does that mean that, you know, is that still valid? My sense is that it is, it's recorded. And typically the only way you can change things like that that are recorded against the property, and that is recorded against this piece of property, is by getting at least 50% of everybody in that subdivision to agree to do something different. So that's one thing I want you to keep in the back of your mind. The other thing from a constraint is on the right-hand side, what you can see is that there's a lot of different easements that have been plotted. We actually did for the district back in 2010. We wanted to understand more about all the easements that were referenced in the title report. So we had this all plotted out, and you can see if somebody were to come in and do something with the property, all of the different constraints that would be there. And again, that has an impact to what you can do, and it has an impact to value. So again, as I said before, we're drilling down on these things to give you as the 7-Eleven committee members really the information that anybody would need to know that would be looking at what can I do with this property? And that's again going to be a function of what are the constraints. Again, constraints are physical. In this case, you can see easements, you know, water lines, drainage easements, and they're also political, which would be zoning and things like that. So again, I wanted to give everybody an example. We're going to be talking with the other properties that we have, especially Adams. We've got mapping on that also. So we're going to be talking about those kinds of things on all of these properties, again, to help everyone on the committee understand what's there and what are the constraints. And again, I'm hoping that this all makes sense to everybody, at least, you know, at this 10,000 foot level. So are there any questions about this property? Well, either I did a really good job or I'm just baffling everybody. So I'm hoping it's the form. So
Scott, it was a great overview. And to remind everybody, we're going to, in our future meetings, drill down. And so you can ask the same questions you may have asked tonight as we get into each property and the specifics. And tonight was just to give you an overview of what we're looking at. And then we'll come from 10,000 feet, as Scott mentioned, down to something smaller, looking at each site.
yes. So again, there's going to be a lot more information. It's not going to be drinking through a fire hose, I hope, for the committee, but there is a lot of information. And from our perspective, in order to make good decisions, you really need to understand what it is you're making decisions about. So that's why we're going to walk you through this. I hope it's going to be helpful, educational, and informative. And with that, I think I'm done unless there's anybody that has any questions. I see no hands raised. Okay, so moving on to E, action items. So what we need to do, part of the 7-Eleven process, is to elect officers. That would be a chairperson, a vice chair, and a secretary. So Melissa, is there a particular way that you do these in terms of other advisory groups that would be helpful for this committee to understand?
So typically we would ask for nominations and then we would do a vote. But I was going to check the membership still on the line because I don't know if we have
A quorum?
Doreen needed to leave.
So we only have 4 committee members currently present. So we may want to table these items to be at the beginning of the next meeting. I would offer that to the group as a suggestion.
I don't know how you could legally do something without a quorum.
Some of us actually listened to Nancy earlier, said we violate the Brown Act, it's all null and void. So we don't have much choice here.
I agree. I don't want to dictate. So.
I move that we table this action item for the next meeting.
We can't even have a motion.
You can't entertain a motion because we can't vote, because we don't have a quorum.
Okay.
But Samantha, we can take your suggestion.
We'll take the suggestion on that. So so we will put this as the first order of business at our next meeting.
And one of the things that I heard this evening was field trips to see the sites. And so I will make sure that that is included on the next agenda along with the future meetings.
If I can just comment on that.
That would be
The
great.
logistics of that are going to be extremely difficult for this group because this is spread out over a very wide area.
Mhm.
And typically, I understand that some people actually have day jobs. And so we can't be doing this in the middle of the day, especially involving the public. But how do you get from Adams or Portala out to Terra Hills?
Mhm.
And then I mean, it's a logistical nightmare.
Don, if I might add, we've done this in the past, and how we do this is we post that where we're going to begin the meeting, and we do all that in public and invite the public to come, and we actually open the meeting at whatever that destination is, whether it be the district office or some common place, and we take a school bus and we put the members of the committee along with anybody in the public that wants to come. And we actually, Scott does an outstanding job of discussing the properties on our way to that site. And we probably could use a meeting format to do that, because I agree with you that picking another time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 10 o'clock in the morning may not be convenient for everybody. And we can accomplish it that way. So comments from the public can be heard. And then when we end the field trip, we go back into discussion and can hear more public comments. So it actually works quite well. We've had legal look at it as far as Brown Act issues. There are none as long as it's properly posted, one, and two, include anybody that wants to come along on a field trip.
One of my concerns on that is when you start dealing with the public may not be interested in all 4 sites. They may be interested in the one that's in their neighborhood. And so you would almost want to post, say, well, we're going to be at Harman Knowles at 6:45 so that they can be there without having to be at the starting point and at the beginning and sit through the whole thing, because all they care about is one little bit. It's, again, it's a logistical nightmare. All I can do is bring up issues and leave it up to a lot of people to try to figure out the solutions to those issues.
And one of the things we discussed is that the locations between the properties, 2 of them are pretty close, 2 and 2, right?
Yeah.
The Portala site and then the Cvu and Harman Knowl site are really close. And so there's a way to break it up into 2 different trips if we have to, where people can get to the sites.
I don't know if a Saturday is an option.
All things for discussion.
Yeah.
We can discuss that. And Don, one of the solutions to the issue you raised, we actually had that on a field trip, and the spouse of the person that didn't want to go to all the sites met the school bus at a certain site, and that person got off the tour and went home.
Yeah, again, it's a logistical issue. There's no question about that. Not only from internally from our group, the 7-Eleven committee, but then the distance between the various sites. So what, and again, one of the things I wanted to do was give everybody on the committee at least the roadmap to where these sites are. I mean, obviously it's going to be easy for everybody if they wanted to go drive it. I like the idea a lot of being able to talk with you while we're there and have a discussion about a lot of the things that we talked about. What's the opportunities? What are the constraints? And then here's why we kind of form those ideas. So again, I think it's important, but it is logistically a challenge.
If I can, one, two, also, 3 out of the 4 sites are easily visible from the street, from multiple streets even. So people could go visit them and get a good look at them on their own if they wanted to. The Adams site, because you've got buildings on there, it's a little bit different story, and they got fences around it. But I've been to the other sites and taken a lot of photographs on my own without going on the property. Not a whole lot to see. It's just flat and a lot of weeds. But if people are able to visit them on their own, then maybe they're not going to be spending so much time on the visit itself, trying to walk around. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and again, even if we did something where we go to the sites, we're probably not going to be walking around, because then we'd be spending 6 hours, between travel time and everything else, and that's a fairly big time commitment, I think, for everybody. So again, I wanted to give everybody maps of where they were, so if they chose to do that, at least they would have those identified locations, and they would have an aerial that would give them that perspective. So what I would suggest, and again, if the committee members can think about this, give us your feedback, and you can funnel that through Melissa in terms of what your thoughts are on that. We can add that to our agenda, our next agenda. And again, maybe that's a better way to deal with it, is talk about that as an agendized item at our next meeting. Louis, any thoughts on that? I know we've talked about that.
All the ideas I think tonight are good ideas. Some of those being self-visits, and for those sites that may be more complicated to get on, like Adams, maybe we would have the meeting held there so we could actually, that site, but the ones that are flat properties, folks could visit on their own.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I don't have the agenda up, but I believe we're at the end of it.
That's correct.
So is there any other comments from any of our remaining people here? Committee members and or staff?
So in the future, when we meet and we need to vote on things, like I wasn't sure what the time frame was for today's meeting, so I'm not sure if people, maybe that wasn't communicated clearly that we needed to meet for 2 hours to make sure all voting members would be available, but seems to me that if we want things to progress with this meeting, we need to assure that we do have access to a quorum by the end of each meeting. So I'm not sure how to remedy that or what kind of suggestions to make, but it seems kind of useless to go through all these steps if we're not going to be able to take any actionable motions.
Samantha, I think your suggestion is a very good one that we put on the agenda, begins at 6, ends at 8. So people know exactly. And I was looking at our agenda, we can add that for next time, the meeting 6 to 8, because I know with Doreen, I think she may have thought it was shorter.
This is a school district, nothing short.
Absolutely agree on that. So again, I really appreciate everybody's time on this because I know we're taking away, at least it's not Monday Night Football. So we're not taking away any of that. So, but it is really important for everybody to be able to understand, participate, and be part of this. And again, it's not a real huge time commitment when you think about it. We've got 4 meetings, 2 hours each, and then a presentation. So again, it's important. It's concentrated, but it's important. So absolutely agree, Samantha, with your comments on that.
And I have on the calendar August 25th, 6 to 8 p.m. for our next meeting. Is that accurate, Melissa?
Yes, that's correct.
So what we'll do also, Melissa, if we can, is send out a reminder to everybody on the committee to please put that on the calendar. In fact, would it be possible to do a calendar invite that you could send out to the committee members and have them put that on their calendar? I know that always works well for me in terms of blocking that time out and understanding what it is. Would that be possible to do?
So what I'll be doing at the conclusion of the meeting is working with our communications office to have this recorded Zoom meeting posted on the district's YouTube channel. So this meeting will be available to the community and to all committee members. I will send an email to the committee to let them know once it's posted, and I can include the dates, which the dates are included in today's packet. So that information is available, and then we will always send out the agenda and packet for Brown Act. Typically our meetings are scheduled for Thursdays, and so the emails with the packet agendas and the postings on our district's website will be done the Friday before the meeting, so the materials are available.
But would it also be possible to send out a calendar invite just to the committee members so they could put that on their calendar?
So I know some of the challenges that we've run into in the past is it depends on the email or the calendar that a committee member may be trying to use. So depending on the system, it doesn't always work out. We'll make sure that it's on the district's calendar. We'll work with the communications team on that. I just know in the past when we've sent out a meeting invitation to committee members that it doesn't always sync with the operating system or the calendar that they may be using.
Well, then I would encourage everybody to please put these dates that are on the agenda on your own calendar then. How's that?
And we'll make sure that it's on the district's calendar as well.
A tip for the existing committee members, having been a 7-Eleven committee member myself, sometimes you go to the meeting and you hear all this stuff and then you forget it. It's very typical. And so going back and listening to the tape, even if you're making dinner or gardening or something, you can do 2 things at one time. Hearing it again can be beneficial. particularly a week or so before the next meeting. Something to think about.
Okay. Any other comments from our standing committee members or sitting in this case? I guess not. Then I guess we'll adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. We appreciate your.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you.